At 90 years old, Bobby Bare lives tucked away in rural Tennessee, where whispers float about something strange stirring behind his quiet life. A country music legend with more hits than headlines, Bobby has always preferred the shadows. But lately, neighbors have noticed something odd. Visits from music executives, a delivery truck carrying studio gear, and even rumors that he's working on a final project. Some say it's a memoir. Others swear he's recording an album meant for release only after his passing. What is Bobby hiding at this age? And why is he suddenly taking meetings again after years of silence? As one source close to the Bare family put it, he's not done telling his story, but he's going to tell it his way. And when it hits, it'll shake Nashville. This isn't just the tale of a retired artist. It's the beginning of a final act that may redefine how Bobby Bare is remembered, and the quiet power behind his choices is already turning heads. Bobby Bare's success wasn't flashy, but it was steady, and that's exactly why it lasted. While many of his peers fell victim to record label traps, tour debts, and fleeting radio hits, Bobby played the long game. From the moment he broke through with Detroit City, he showed a savvy that set him apart. He negotiated smarter deals, retained ownership over his publishing, and carefully avoided tying himself too tightly to any one label. His music career didn't burn fast. It burned slow, and it's still smoldering today. Over the decades, Bare built a quiet financial empire. He never flaunted it, never bought a mansion in Beverly Hills, and never made headlines for extravagant spending. But make no mistake, Bobby Bare is a millionaire many times over. Conservative estimates place his net worth around $6 to $10 million, but close insiders believe that number could be higher due to unpublicized investments and royalties that continue to trickle in every quarter. Songs like 500 Miles Away from Home and Marie Laveau have been streamed millions of times across platforms and continue to play on classic country stations around the world. Even more impressive is Bare's grip on songwriting royalties. Unlike many of his contemporaries who signed their rights away in the 1960s and 70s for short-term cash, Bobby held on. That decision, unpopular with some label heads at the time, meant long-term security. Those rights bring in consistent money even today. His songs are licensed for movies, television, and documentaries, and his deeper cuts have become prized samples for new-era producers digging into outlaw country archives. He also made smart personal investments. Friends say Bare put money into farmland, recording studios, and even a few small oil ventures in Texas. None of this was ever advertised. He never branded himself as a mogul. He was the guy in the denim jacket, boots scuffed from real dirt, not Hollywood sets. But behind that humble exterior was a man who played the music business like chess, while others were still playing checkers. Now at 90, he doesn't need to tour. He doesn't need to sell another record. Bobby Bare could live another 30 years off the interest alone from his publishing royalties and still have money left to pass on. He's not just a survivor of the industry, he quietly beat the system, and most folks still haven't realized how. Bobby Bare's home tells the story of a man who never needed flash to feel rich. Tucked away on a modest piece of land just outside Nashville, his main residence is surrounded by trees, a wraparound porch, and decades of silence, broken only by birds, guitar strings, and the occasional old friend dropping by. From the outside, it looks like any other rural Tennessee home, quiet, unbothered, peaceful. But inside, it's a living museum of country music history. Framed photos line the walls, Bobby with Johnny Cash backstage, laughing with Waylon Jennings, and sitting beside a young Kris Kristofferson scribbling lyrics on a napkin. Shelves are stacked with demo tapes, handwritten lyrics, and unreleased recordings in boxes marked only by dates and first names. It's not a house that brags. It's a house that breathes. But there's more. Few people know that Bobby also owns a rustic cabin nestled in the Smoky Mountains, a few hours' drive from Nashville. It's entirely off-grid, solar-powered, no Wi-Fi, and no obvious signs of modern tech. According to one of the few producers who's been there, Bobby uses it for something he calls truth time. It's where he goes to write when the noise of the world becomes too much. Some say there's an entire notebook stored up there containing poems and confessions never meant to see the light of day, unless Bobby says otherwise. He bought the land decades ago, long before the Smokies became a real estate gold mine. At the time, people thought he was crazy for wanting a hideout so far from the action. Now, it's become his sanctuary. There's a wood stove, a single rocking chair, and a dusty reel-to-reel tape machine. When Bobby disappears for a few weeks, his family knows where he is. But they also know not to call unless it's urgent. Beyond that, Bobby has refused to buy up flashy real estate in other cities. No California compound, no Manhattan apartment, no beachfront getaways in Florida. For him, Tennessee is enough. The land, the quiet, the history, it all feeds his soul in a way Beverly Hills never could. His properties may not make headlines in luxury magazines, but in terms of value, emotional, historical, and financial, they're priceless, because every inch of dirt he owns carries a story. And Bobby Bear's story isn't just etched in vinyl, it's carved into the land he calls home. Family has always been a steady but complicated thread in Bobby Bear's life. At 90 years old, he now watches quietly as his legacy lives on, not just in music history books or dusty vinyl records, but in his children, especially his son, Bobby Bear Jr. Their relationship has traveled its own winding road, filled with years of distance, artistic differences, and eventual reconciliation that only age and time could bring. Bobby Bear Jr., a respected musician in his own right, didn't ride his father's coattails. Instead, he carved his own lane in alternative country and rock, often leaning into raw, grittier sounds. At times, his work felt like a rebellion against his father's polished, Nashville-rooted style, but those creative divergences were always underscored by a deep respect. In interviews, Bobby Jr. often described his father as quietly brilliant and stubborn in all the right ways. And as Bobby Sr. aged, the pair found themselves in each other's orbits more and more. Now, they collaborate behind the scenes in ways the public rarely sees. Bobby Jr. handles digital rights, advises on royalty streams, and helps manage unreleased archives that his father has been quietly organizing. And when they sit down together to write, it's less about hits and more about honesty. One source close to the family said the last song they wrote together wasn't even meant to be recorded. It was written just to make each other laugh. Bobby Sr. also has other children, some biological, some stepchildren, who he's kept largely away from the public spotlight. His wife, Jeannie Bear, passed away in 2016, leaving behind a void Bobby still doesn't like to speak about. Since then, he's become more introspective, more focused on putting his affairs in order and ensuring his children understand the value of the life he built. Not just the money, but the meaning behind it. Despite his fame, Bobby was never the dad chasing magazine covers or red carpets. He attended school plays when he could, took his kids on low-key road trips during summers, and made sure they understood that fame was fleeting, but character lasts. One of his grandchildren is rumored to be pursuing music quietly, with Bobby's blessing, but not his guidance. "Make your own mistakes," he told them, "then come back and tell me about them." In the end, Bobby Bear's family reflects the very ethos of his music: honest, gritty, and human. No theatrics, just real life. And while he's always been reserved about personal matters, those closest to him say his greatest pride isn't in his gold records, but in seeing his family carry the torch, on stage, off stage, and in ways the public may never fully grasp. Bobby Bear's car collection isn't something you'd expect from a 90-year-old country music legend. It's not filled with Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces, or rows of chrome-plated trophies. Instead, it's a rolling museum of stories, vehicles that carry the dust of back roads, memories of late-night drives after concerts, and pieces of Nashville history hidden beneath faded paint and cracked leather seats. His most prized possession, a 1965 Lincoln Continental, black with suicide doors and a leather interior that smells like old cigarettes and vinyl records. It's the same car he used to drive to RCA Studio B in the 60s when he was recording hits that would define his career. Bobby's kept it running all these years, not because it's flashy, but because, in his words, it still hums like a memory. Parked in the corner of his barn garage, it's covered in a thick layer of nostalgia and the occasional wool blanket to protect it from Tennessee's unpredictable weather. Then, there's his pickup truck, an old, beat-up 1978 Ford F-150 that's seen more dirt roads than most tour buses. It's dented, dusty, and as reliable as Bobby himself. Friends say he still uses it to haul supplies between his main home and the off-grid cabin in the Smokies. It has no GPS, no Bluetooth, and barely working AC, but it's his favorite. She rattles a little in the morning, just like me, he jokes. Surprisingly, Bobby does own one luxury vehicle, a 2015 Cadillac Escalade, gifted to him by a longtime friend in the business after a particularly successful licensing deal. He rarely drives it, claims it's too quiet and too new, but his grandchildren borrow it on occasion. It sits polished in the driveway, like a fancy guest who showed up to a backyard BBQ. What makes Bobby's vehicles special isn't the price tag, it's the purpose. Each one represents a chapter of his life. The old tour van from the 70s, still parked behind the barn, rusting into legend. The motorcycle he rode exactly once before, declaring, "I ain't got the knees for this," covered and tucked away in a storage unit, collecting stories instead of miles. Bobby Bear never needed speed to prove his worth, and he never needed flash to prove his fame. His vehicles, like his music, were built to last, quiet, enduring, and full of grit. And in a world obsessed with reinvention and rebranding, Bobby's wheels still roll to the beat of his own rhythm. Simple, solid, timeless, just like the man himself. At 90 years old, Bobby Bear's daily routine is anything but typical. But then again, he's never lived life by anyone else's schedule. These days, his mornings start early, just as the sun begins to filter through the trees surrounding his Tennessee home. He brews a single cup of black coffee in an old percolator he swears by, no matter how many times friends have tried to gift him a fancy Keurig. That morning ritual, coffee, porch, birds, is sacred. "I like to hear the world wake up before it starts yelling," he once said. He doesn't check emails. He doesn't scroll social media. Bobby still writes everything by hand. Ideas, thoughts, snippets of lyrics, on yellow legal pads stacked in a drawer beside his recliner. By 8 a.m., he's usually already jotting something down, whether it's a forgotten memory or a single line that might one day become a song. Some mornings, he'll hum a melody into a tape recorder that looks like it was pulled from the 70s. "It ain't broke," he says, "so I don't fix it." 3 days a week, Bobby meets with a small group of local musicians at a quiet, tucked-away studio not far from his house. They don't record much. Mostly they sit around swapping stories, playing unfinished songs and laughing over old war stories from the road. These jam sessions aren't about making hits. They're about keeping the soul sharp. "Playing keeps my hands warm and my heart warmer," Bobby's told them more than once. Afternoons are slow. Sometimes he'll drive into town for lunch at a no-frills diner that still recognizes him but never makes a fuss. The staff know not to ask for selfies or post pictures. He's earned that respect. He eats light, usually something like grilled fish and vegetables. After lunch, he often visits a nearby independent bookstore, thumbing through biographies, history books, and old poetry. Occasionally, he'll sign a dusty copy of his own autobiography without saying a word to the cashier. Evenings are for the porch. As dusk settles in, Bobby pours a small glass of bourbon, just one, and rocks in the same chair he's had for decades. Sometimes he listens to old records, sometimes just the crickets. He says that's when he thinks about the past the most, not in regret, but in reflection. "Every wrong turn had a good song in it," he said. Though his body has slowed, His mind is sharp. Bobby reads, writes, thinks, and remembers. He doesn't need much, just time, silence, and space to reflect. At 90, he's not chasing relevance. He's preserving peace. And somehow, in this fast-spinning world, that's become his most rebellious act. Bobby Bare may be retired from the spotlight, but his presence in the music industry is still felt. Stronger than many realize. Behind closed doors, his voice still matters. In Nashville circles, his name carries the weight of someone who not only lived the golden era of country music, but helped define it. He's not interested in awards or legacy tours. He's interested in truth, craftsmanship, and making sure the right stories are remembered. In recent years, Bare has quietly become a mentor to a new generation of country and Americana artists. They seek him out, not for fame, but for wisdom. Artists like Sturgill Simpson, Margot Price, and Tyler Childers have mentioned him in interviews as an influence, not just musically, but philosophically. Bobby's style, unpolished, poetic, rooted in life's quiet moments, resonates with musicians looking to escape the cookie-cutter Nashville formula. When asked what advice he gives them, Bare simply says, "Don't lie. Don't sing it unless you lived it. The audience can smell fake a mile away." He's also taken to guest appearances on lesser-known radio shows and music podcasts, usually ones that dive deep into storytelling. These conversations often reveal a side of Bare most fans never saw. During his heyday, a deeply thoughtful man with opinions on everything from the death of originality in commercial music to the corporatization of country radio. "Country music used to be about people," he said in one interview. "Now, it's about brands." Behind the scenes, Bare has helped produce and arrange tribute albums, lending his ear and experience to projects honoring legends like Tom T. Hall, Kris Kristofferson, and even some of his lesser-known contemporaries who never got their due. He believes in giving flowers while folks can still smell them, a philosophy he's carried his whole life. Perhaps most touching is the project he's been working on quietly with his son, curating an archive of unreleased songs, old letters, and acoustic demos to be donated to the Country Music Hall of Fame. It's not about ego, it's about history. Bobby wants the full story told, the heartbreaks, the flops, the nights sleeping in cars between gigs. "If they're gonna talk about me," he once said, "they might as well get it right." In many ways, Bobby Bare is still influencing the direction of country music, not from a stage, but from a porch, a tape deck, and a quiet room full of memories. His silence speaks louder now than most people's shouting. And for those who truly listen, Bobby Bare is still teaching, even at 90. While Bobby Bare has never been a man obsessed with money, his net worth at 90 years old remains quietly impressive, though you won't see him flaunting it. Estimates place his wealth somewhere between $5 million and $10 million. Though even that might be conservative. But the truth is, Bobby's never been about the numbers in his bank account. He measures value in memories, songs, and land, things you can't always quantify. His catalog alone, dozens of albums, songwriting credits, and licensing rights, generates consistent passive income, from timeless hits like Detroit City and 500 Miles Away from Home to cult classics that still get played in movies and TV shows. Bobby's publishing royalties have become a steady stream. His decision to hold on to many of his masters, rather than sell them off during the rush of the 2000s, turned out to be a wise one. As country music gets rediscovered by younger generations, his voice is being heard in places he never expected. Streaming playlists, TikTok videos, documentaries. Bobby also owns valuable real estate in Tennessee, land that has skyrocketed in value over the past few decades. His off-grid Smoky Mountain cabin alone sits on a stretch of untouched forest that developers have quietly tried to get their hands on. He's refused every offer. "You can't buy peace," he says, "and I already own mine." But perhaps most surprising is the fact that Bobby has been quietly investing for years. Friends close to him say he has a small but smart portfolio, low-risk mutual funds, royalties management, and a handful of shares in old Nashville businesses he helped bankroll decades ago. One of those ventures, a publishing house he co-founded in the 80s, was recently acquired by a major entertainment group. That deal alone padded his estate significantly. Still, Bobby lives modestly. He doesn't wear watches that cost more than a car. He doesn't own jets or yachts. His splurges are simple: a new guitar, books, music gear for his grandchildren, and the occasional donation to causes that matter to him, like music education programs for rural kids and veteran mental health organizations. He once said, "I made my money slow and spent it slower." And even now, that philosophy hasn't changed. Bobby Bare may be wealthy by traditional standards, but he's rich in ways few people ever become, through art, love, land, and a legacy that's still unfolding. And while the world spins faster every day, Bobby keeps his pace steady, his roots deep, and his wealth quiet. At 90 years old, Bobby Bare is no longer chasing stages or chart positions. He's living in the quiet echo of a life well sung. But what sets him apart from so many of his peers is that he hasn't disappeared. He's not tucked away in some unreachable mansion or lost in the fog of retirement. Bobby Bare is still here, still observing, still thinking, and if you ask him, still learning. These days, he's become something of a mythical figure to younger artists, writers, and fans alike. Not because he demands attention, but because his silence speaks volumes. When Bobby does speak, whether it's through a rare interview, a guest vocal on an indie track, or a handwritten note of encouragement to a young songwriter, it carries weight. His approval isn't given lightly, and in today's oversaturated industry, that makes it gold. What's perhaps most powerful, though, is the way Bobby has chosen to close this chapter of his life with humility and grace. While others scramble to rebrand or grasp for relevance, Bobby's legacy is being defined by exactly what made him special in the first place: honesty, simplicity, and soul. His home has become a quiet sanctuary for visiting musicians, family dinners, and reflection. There's no need for press tours or social media campaigns. He lets the work speak. He's even begun writing his final book, not a memoir, but a collection of lessons, quiet truths. It's tentatively titled Low Notes and High Roads: The Things Nobody Told Me About Country Music. It won't be about scandal or name-dropping. Instead, it's meant for those who are trying to live a life like his, creative, rooted, and free. His health, though stable, has naturally slowed. There are days when he can't play for long, and nights when the arthritis makes his fingers swell. But even then, Bobby says he finds comfort in music he doesn't have to play, listening to old friends, spinning records late into the night, and hearing the stories of others who've kept the flame alive. As for how he wants to be remembered, Bobby keeps it simple. "I don't want statues or streets named after me," he once told a friend. "I just want someone, somewhere, to put on one of my songs when they need the truth." And that's Bobby Bare. No need for the spotlight anymore. He built his house out of words, melodies, and grit. And now, as he rocks gently on his porch, he's watching the sun set with no regrets and a heart full of stories that still matter.